Hello, everyone. Welcome to Arash's World. We have Mylo Schaaf today. Welcome to Arash's World.
Thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here.
Great. And could we start off with simply a brief description of yourself? How would you describe yourself? And then I'm very much looking forward to talking about your book.
So I would describe myself as, first of all, a parent
Mhm.
who had to find a path through the terrors and horrors of grief after my son passed away at the age of 24.
I'm very sorry
I'm
to hear.
also thank you. I'm also trained as a journalist, an editor, and physician. And it was with my son's death that I really started working on my poetry.
And your poetry book is Blown Into Now, Poems for a Journey. And so you are using poetry to describe your feelings of grief and also of finding a path towards healing and trying to go in that direction. And it's accompanied by photos from your son that are added to each of the poem.
That's correct.
Mhm,
I didn't intend to put my poems into a book.
mhm,
The poems just needed to be written as I was trying to figure out what do you do when someone so dear to you passes on. And so I would talk to people and I would ask them, how they had navigated this kind of a passage. And over those years, these poems came about. And the photographs are my son's photographs. He was a world traveler, an adventurer, a veteran. He had been to Iraq, and he was also really engaged with nature and photography.
mhm,
And so his photographs are with beside each of the poems, and they provide sort of a respite from grief and a way to kind of renew yourself and be careful with yourself and realize you may need um, to use some of the techniques or ideas to help support your path.
mhm.
And the path is not, it's not all sadness. It's goes sort of up and down as you expect any path would, but it eventually heads toward joy and toward understanding. And it didn't take 12 years, but the poems sort of evolved over that time. The last couple I wrote after my parents also passed. And so my mother passed on about 2 months ago.
Sorry to hear that too.
Yeah, yeah.
But so they are basically, would you say they are snapshots of different like stages and states that you found yourself in? So is it like that?
Yes,
Your
there
points.
are snapshots of different states,
Mhm,
as well as snapshots of techniques that I tried and things that I watched out for. And sort of there is some, I don't know if magic is the right word, but there are some things that don't make sense except like that your loved one is trying to say hello. And so those are the kinds of things that made brought a lot of peace and a lot of comfort.
Magic is the word, and I think like even poetry itself to try to express itself is magical, and there are many things that kind of defy reason, and
Yeah,
I've experienced it myself too throughout my life, and my father passed away last year, and it's
I'm
that
sorry.
kind of connection. Thanks, but that kind of connection does exist because I said to him, drop by, come and visit, and he
Exactly.
has. He has.
Yes.
It's
Yeah.
in my dreams. And it said, actually, pretty much said, here I am. What do you want to talk about? And
Right.
we can dismiss it as just figment of our imagination, but I think those who do that are wrong. There is that kind of presence that we feel. And although it's very painful because we do miss the people in our lives, they're on a different place, I think, and they want us to be happy, right? So that
Right.
is
Right.
to have joy. So we shouldn't be stuck in that position. I think definitely grief is we can't rush it and you shouldn't, and you have to go through a process, but don't stay there too long, I would think. And again, that's probably your message that you're giving with your book.
That's exactly right.
Mhm.
And if people go around and talk to the ones around them, their friends and their family, and saying, how are you managing this? Or even I talked to people I didn't know very well, or people who came to comfort me,
Hmm.
and there's so many different ideas, and it didn't involve anything unusual like a seance or something like that. It was just in more in the natural environment than anything else, out in nature when I would walk, and certain kinds of things would happen
Yeah.
that were
Yeah.
magic. Yeah,
Yeah, and with even like a random raccoon that kind of looks at you funny and is like overly friendly, you get like what is happening there? And it could be a manifestation of a spirit of a loved one. And I think
right,
keeping that in mind, and if that is part that fits into one's beliefs, is really important
right,
to realize that.
right. I think having it fit into your beliefs is really important because people's beliefs are sacred, and so you have to see how it fits. The other thing that happens to people and has happened to me is you hear your loved one speaking,
Yeah,
and so with my son, who I was really close to, we can almost. I sometimes say, what do you think? And I get this little answer, and my mother is more like, I won't be asking anything. She'll just say, "That's okay. It's gonna be okay." I can
yeah.
hear her voice in my ear. So, yeah, so there are a lot of ways to, feel the closeness after someone passes.
Yeah, yeah. And you chose poetry. Was that something that you had written before in the past, maybe years ago, or is it completely new terrain for you in terms of writing?
I had written some in the past.
Mhm.
I had also done a lot of prose writing.
Mhm.
I had published a children's book,
Oh, cool.
and yeah, and I had trained in journalism, so I trained in writing, and then I worked as a book published as a book editor
Mhm.
for about 2 or 3 years before I went to medical school. So, but poetry, even though I'd written some in the past, it was not. I didn't have an urgent need to do it like I did after Alex passed.
Yeah. I was as a teen, I was really drawn towards poetry, and
Oh,
I've written some myself, but it's really like and music and movies, and it's like I think that there are many things that we cannot express with words, and it's
right.
but poetry somehow manages to do that, to go deeper by using these words in a way that go very, very deep and profound, and that's
Yeah.
fascinating. But then another thing would be photography and movies, literature again in terms of like writing. But for me, it's always also been music, and that is tapping
Yeah.
into areas that I cannot express in words.
Completely agree with you, and I'm glad you added music. Music, I think, is the poetry of our time if it's done well,
Yeah.
because people will say, "Oh, I don't really read poetry," but when you listen carefully to the lyrics of certain songwriters and performers, it's clearly poetry.
Hmm.
And
And
it's and the thing. Go ahead.
yeah, especially if it comes from the heart, where it's like
Yeah,
authentic. You're not just there to make money
yeah,
or sound good. It's like expressing an emotion, whatever the emotion is. Hmm.
yeah. And then you realize that they're expressing something exactly like you're feeling it, and then you hear the melody in your mind, and so it's really a wonderful medium. I hope sometime I can find a way to put some of these poems to music.
That'd be wonderful. I've done poetry readings in the past and I've stopped doing that, unfortunately. But there was one where somebody was playing an instrument, was playing the flute. And I said, like right there that night, it's like, let's combine forces. So they ended
Oh,
up playing as I was reading. And it was just like, it was improvised, of course, and it could have been much better. But I thought that
yeah,
is amazing because we can combine music easily with the words, and it just adds so much more depth to it than it already has.
right, right. I think that's really true.
And it's also things that resonate with us, but it's deeper than that, because once you have gone through suffering, through pain, you really like it resonates so on a much deeper level with you, and especially when it comes to music. For me, poetry was resonating with my quest for a romantic partner when I was a teen, and
Uh,
it was a lot of suffering. But again, in comparison to when you get older and you look at real suffering, you just kind of dismiss it. But at the same time, I really think that that was important for my development because it created a sort of ideal within me, even though not necessarily based in reality, but I think deeper than that, that kind of romantic ideal, that kind of a close relationship. And it is through, again, poetry and music. And I find in today's world, that is often missing because people are not approaching these arts enough. And when they do,
Hmm.
it's on a rather superficial level. It's not like, I want to grasp something, I want to understand something. That's how I approach
Hmm.
philosophy too. And philosophers are struggling with ideas, and I can relate to that. But it's often treated as something that, okay, well, this is interesting, right? And it's much more than that, though.
Hmm. I completely agree with you. Yeah. Yeah.
And I think once you tap into that and you can express your own voice, or in any art form, really, whether it's poetry or photography or music, it's really like finding that deep voice inside.
Right, and that's another way that I have healed,
Mhm,
is to be able to write poetry, but as you say, it could be photography, it could be painting, it
mhm,
could be just writing in a journal, and
mhm, mhm,
and even free form, just write those words that come out, and then sometimes you can take pieces of them and put into either a prose piece or a poem. So
mhm,
all the arts can help so much with the spirit inside the body who's trying to
mhm.
heal.
And yeah, journaling helps. Do you keep a journal yourself?
I do
Yeah,
keep a journal.
yeah.
Um, I tend to try and do things really well, and so I tend to get behind.
Mhm.
But you know, to sit down and say, now I have this time to do it, but that's the way to miss a lot of what you would want to have written.
I agree with
So
you. I think I mean, poetry is wonderful, but poetry is a craft, and so is music, and you want to make it as good, as presentable as possible. Whereas I think
yeah,
the journaling is like, it's also really free flowing, just let it come out. Spelling errors and
yeah,
punctuation. I am an instructor too, so those things bother me when they happen. But I'm just like, no, this is about the pure sensation, the emotions and thoughts that are flowing into my head and in my body. And I found through moments of pain and suffering and anxiety, it really helps. I mean, psychologists have done studies and they say it, but they say a lot of things. Once you try it out and say, no, it actually does work.
right,
It's really important to just let it flow out freely, without
yeah.
judgment, without blame, without regret, and just like, this is me. And nobody has to see it. That's the wonderful part of it. It's just like for your own eyes.
Yeah, and it's like your secret friend, you know, and
Exactly.
it's some odd way it supports you because you feel
Yes.
like you've told all those hard things and now you feel better, you know?
And so, talking about my teen, when I was a teen, my teenage years, I found my journal that I had when I was 16. And it was
Oh,
it was when I was in Germany, so it's all in German. And I found it fascinating to read it like 30 years later. And
yeah,
it just like to connect with that part of who I was. And some of it just shake my head and I say, oh my God. Other parts I say, oh, I have like this sympathy, this love for this character that I was, who's completely different from who I am now in many ways.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I have, I'm on volume 3 now of my
Mhm.
journal, and, it began, just as I started medical school, so a long time ago. And it's right, you can, and also it's wonderful to look at the things that we've lost to memory,
Mhm.
like a photograph, but it's deeper because it's
Much
sort of
deeper.
like it's opening how you, as you just said, how I was at that
Yes.
time. And oh, that those poor mistakes I made, you know, I couldn't have done any better because that's who I was, right?
Exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
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 It's also insight in the mind. And now that I have more, a stronger background in psychology, and I know about the unconscious, which I believe is definitely true. But you can see it manifest and you kind of like psychoanalyze yourself and you say,
Yeah.
this is what happened. This is why it happened. And it's putting those pieces together and you say the whole is really good. And you needed that part of whatever it was, whatever experience it was, to lead you to the path and to the part you're at now, the destination that you're at now. So it's like this puzzle where you have all these pieces and suddenly it's
Hmm.
fitting and you go, this is wonderful, even though the
Yeah.
experience was awful, but it is the right piece in a way to get me to where I'm at now.
Yeah. And the other thing I think is that it can help you have compassion for other people. Because when people do things that you say, God, that just doesn't make any sense. And then you look at where you came from.
Mhm.
My father has this saying that he would say very rarely because he was a quiet man.
Mm.
But and it's well known, but it's do the best you can under the circumstances,
Yes, I
and
love that.
that's what we're always doing.
Yeah, yeah, we are,
Yeah.
and it's yeah, and as you're saying, I've once you discover that within yourself, you're so much more compassionate and also patient with others, because
Hmm.
you know the path and you know that there are these detours, and you try not to judge them for it, and you just try not to push them either, and just like or rush them and say, okay, you have your own path, and it's got lots of zigzags and detours, but you are walking, and you are
Hmm.
getting to a destination. You're not stuck, and I think that is hugely important, because I feel a lot of people get stuck, whether it's stuck in
Hmm.
the past or an experience, or a perception they have of themselves. This is who I am, but it's a very limited view of themselves.
Hmm.
And I can see that you are not, because you're a physician, you're a journalist, you're a poet, and you're exploring new things. So that is like this
Hmm.
constant like movement and progress. And I think that's very important. And trying out new things and see how it goes and see where it takes you.
Hmm. I think that's really true. Yeah. I was wondering, can I say something about my book? Would that be okay right now?
Absolutely. That's why we're here. Yeah, I know where
Yeah.
yeah, definitely.
So let me just show you the cover so people
Hmm.
can recognize it, even though it might be.
Hmm.
Is that clear? And
Hmm.
then this book, because it has the photos in it, like this one, for example,
Hmm.
which is a prayer pole in Tibet,
Oh.
um, is on photo, nice paper. And so, unfortunately, the book is more expensive than I wanted it to be. I'm not
Hmm.
getting any proceeds from it, but just to print it. But there is some good news, which is that in a week or two, I keep waiting for someone to email me back that it's finished. There'll be an ebook that'll be
Oh,
available, and
wonderful.
it'll only be like $4 or something.
Oh, okay.
So that'll make it really available, because that's my goal, is to get this out to as many people as I can.
Yes. And again, those images are so important for it, because they tell again this the other side of the story as well. And I think that's good
Right.
to have it. So you have 45 poems, is that correct?
Yeah, there are
Yeah.
about 45 poems in
Mhm.
here.
Mhm.
I don't, would it be appropriate to read one of them,
Oh,
or not?
yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
definitely.
All right. So this poem is from very early times in my path of grief.
Mhm.
And I was sort of sitting alone at home and wondering, like, what's next? And this is what happened.
Mhm.
People come, and I don't know what to do. That's the title.
Mhm.
In her hands, mine twitch like bird wings. She leans closer. Some things can help, she whispers. We get a lamp of coconut oil. We keep it burning for 14 nights and 14 days. Trim the wick every hour. We repeat holy words. The words help our loved ones pass, and the words will one day bring them back, as if there were no parting. I light a storm candle. Two half remembered women knock on the front door. We have lentil soup for you and bread. Others are coming. I sit. Stories of you encircle me. He takes me down the back stairs, and we sit with the flowers. His eyes flame. Walk, he insists. I walk for my daughter. His daughter had passed on several years ago. I walk for my daughter. I walk every day near trees or streams. I watch. You must watch for secret signs. You are so dear, the one who is gone will sneak back for a moment, wearing the antenna of a cricket, or grazing your cheek like a drunken honeybee. The crows scream. I follow.
No, that's wonderful. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, and yeah, it's again, it's such a like personal experience that you are explaining in such a wonderful way. I
Thank you very much.
I very much applaud that. Yeah.
And if anyone wants to find more about me or Alex or the books,
Mhm.
my website is myloschaaf.com. And so it's MYLOSCHAAF.com.
Mhm.
And when the ebook comes out, the information will be there. And the link to the to Blurb, which is a printer, blurb.com, will be there too.
Mhm. I personally, for me, I like the traditional books. I don't have a Kindle or anything like that, electronic copies of books when I get them, and especially I think if it's poetry and photographs. But I do know that a lot of people just prefer it and they're okay with it. But for me, it's that extra sensation of having the pages that you can flip and
And
notes
go
you can
back
take
to,
and go
yeah,
back to exactly.
yeah,
And there's a
yeah,
lot of that the essential things that you miss out when you have it on as an electronic copy. I mean, I have nothing against it. I think that's wonderful to have it because it's also kind of much easier to get it instead of having to go to a bookstore and or
yeah.
ordering it and waiting for it to come. It's kind of immediate. But for me, that's always been another aspect. I don't know if you feel the same way about books.
I do. I love real books, paper
Mhm,
books.
mhm, yeah.
But when I travel, I have them all on my phone. I have a bunch on my
That
phone.
is what I've heard, and it's very true because you can
Yeah.
have a lot if you wanted to travel with all those books. And I've traveled across countries and moved actually to different places, and my books always come with me. And it's that
Yeah.
extra baggage that you have to pay. And I think maybe I should have just had it on an electronic device, and it's all there. You know, you don't have to like just take it always with you, all that stuff.
Right, right. Although they're your treasured books, so I
And they are, and
understand.
that's the personal copy that you have, and that comes so much. That's so much more meaningful, I think.
Right.
Your son Alex, was he into poetry?
And no,
Mm.
he was an outdoor person, and he would read about outdoor adventures and always had a next trip in mind. And so poetry was not, he loved music and
Okay.
loved really thoughtful music,
Oh, nice.
as well as the high beat music.
Yeah.
But he was spending his time thinking about adventures, like he climbed Kilimanjaro, and it was at the walked around the base of K2, and climbed Rainier. So he was, and it was he I think he had a satellite phone, or someone did, and so he called us and he goes, it's -40 and I've been in my tent and the weather's bad, and so I'll be in my tent for 3 days, but this is so cool.
Mhm, mhm. Oh,
So, and
that's
he was such an
wonderful.
upbeat person too.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, and it's yeah, adventurous. You can sense that somebody who
yeah.
explores. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's why some of these pictures are so extraordinary, because you
Mhm,
wouldn't get to that kind of a place, you
mhm.
know, seeing Everest right behind you, or whatever. Yeah.
I've always been
Peak.
impressed. I had a few mountaineers on my program here, and I've never done it myself. I for me it's just hiking, but like going up mountains, it's just scary. And have you had mountaineering
Um,
experience?
so Kilimanjaro is not really hard except for the very end. So I went up there with my husband and with Alex.
Oh, nice.
Yeah,
Okay. Oh, a
and with our
family
other son.
outing.
Yeah,
Mhm.
a family outing. Yeah.
Yeah.
The last day, last 8 hours is really hard, because you're so high, but it was, so the mountaineering I do is nothing like Alex has done. But it's, walking through the Sierras, and yeah. But Alex, he was such a great person to be with, because for example, we go skiing, and I go, that looks really hard. And me jumping off cliffs, and he go, yeah, mom, you can do it. You can do it. Come on. And then I did
Nice. Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
So yeah, he was
Yeah.
my guide.
I always appreciate that because I think it's like that quest for like going up, for reaching up, for like higher
Yeah.
plateaus, and like symbolically it's quite fascinating. We have a grind here that takes you up to the mountain, and it's like basically an upward hike for like it took me an hour and a half. I think like more experienced people do it in an hour, but it's very
Oh,
steep. And I did
yeah.
it once and I survived it, and it was very difficult. And I got the t-shirt actually that says I survived the grind. And I said never again. But it's that kind of push though. I think it's also like challenging yourself and pushing yourself to go higher, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it wasn't only nature, it was also travel. And so he
Mhm.
went into the Congo Basin, and all a lot to the edge of Afghanistan. And I mean, in in those days, 12 years ago, it was not quite the what's the word? I mean, it was still dangerous, but it was not as heavily the whole world, terrorist ridden as it is now. But they were still amazing adventures. So yeah,
Yeah, that's the thing. Those places come with like cultures and traditions that are just fascinating, and that
they are.
especially the higher plateaus, because not a lot of people have access to them. So it's more like pristine, it's more pure, their traditions and customs that they have.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so anything that was wild or unusual or beautiful, he would search for.
Oh yeah. Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
so when at what point did you decide to publish the book? I mean, you started it off years ago. Was there the intention of publishing, or was there a specific moment you
No.
said, I want to collect them and publish them as a collection of poems?
I think it might have been around year 4 when I looked,
Mm,
4 years after he'd passed. And I looked through them and I thought, this was so hard for me,
mhm,
this path. And, if I can help anyone else, it's really worth it. It'll be such an important thing, be really something that I could give that would make a difference, right? And as a physician, we all struggle with this. Like, what can I do that is, impactful or helpful? And so often it's that, we help one individual and that's good, or we do a public health measure and that's good. But I was sort of in that mindset from having been a physician. And this is encouragement to write people who want to write more and want to publish, and that the encouragement is that I reworked these poems, many, many, many times, and started taking poetry workshops with different teachers. And I can remember one of them about, I don't know, 5 years ago when I thought it was done, or
mhm,
said, I said, "Do you think this is publishable?" And he's a very esteemed teacher, and he said, "Well, you have two choices. You can publish it yourself, and it's really good, or you can completely redo it and have it published, by a press."
mhm.
And I thought, well, I'm not going to waste time. I'm going to publish it myself.
Good for
And
you.
then I thought about it, and I kept seeing that there were revisions I could make in those poems. And I
Mhm,
had some other teachers that were could tell what part of a verse needed work.
mhm,
So the teachers that you can get are 'cause some of them are phenomenal. And so then I kept working on it.
mhm.
And then due to some of the classes I took, I met more people who knew about publishing and publishers, in very small presses. And then it was recognized as something that was publishable by a press. So it's Blue Light Press,
Cool.
and
Yeah.
the printer is Blurb, because
Okay.
they do the best photo reproductions that we
Mhm,
could find,
mhm, mhm.
that
Yeah.
were not too expensive, that were not as expensive as most of them.
Yeah. Has COVID kind of helped with that too? Because a lot of people are turning to these to art forms that they hadn't done before, to publishing, or my podcasting is also thanks to COVID, that has given us also the technology and the tools to reach out more. Has that played a role too, would you say?
I think that has played a role because with the time that you used to spend, going to work or trying to park your car,
Mhm,
um, there's a lot, and you can slow down more. At least some people who don't have small kids at home, and I
yeah.
don't. You can slow down and make decisions about what you do with your extra time. And and take classes like online, like poetry classes or
Mhm.
whatever. So I think that that has helped, and it also makes can make you more thoughtful, I guess you'd say,
Yeah.
or introspective,
Yeah.
and that's very helpful with poetry
Yeah, I've
or
taken a
writing.
lot of yeah, I've taken a lot of online courses that are now accessible, and really good ones. I've learned so much from
Yeah,
them. And it's
yeah.
just like it's so much easier from universities, and you just like you can do it at your own pace, and it's one of we I have a teen, so I don't have to worry too much about him. It's in his
Oh,
own world
yeah.
most of the time. And so I think that it's the slowdown. I completely agree, and resonate with that. It's like really slowed down things, and I save a lot of time. I don't have to commute. It's like you work online, and but I think not everybody has taken advantage of it. I know people who chose to drink more
Mhm.
instead. And I think, which is
Yeah.
fine, right? But I think like you can really use that extra time for something that will be productive for yourself and for like personal development and growth.
And you know, I think what you're saying about the teachers have stepped forward, the good teachers, because that was the access, that was their access to students.
Mhm,
And it's not that hard in terms of finding a teacher. I just went online and, you know, looked at poet.org and so and or just Googled, you know,
mhm,
good poetry classes.
mhm, mhm.
And then you keep looking through them and then you read the poetry of the person who's teaching.
Yeah,
And then you can say, that sounds like what I'm thinking,
exactly.
or it doesn't, you know.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
and then most of the poetry classes are really low cost.
yeah.
So, and you don't need to have a university degree. I mean, there are a lot of MFA classes,
Mhm,
Masters of Fine Arts in Poetry,
mhm.
that are now available either completely online or just with a couple of in-person visits over, you know, 2 years or whatever. So you can also get a formal degree in writing very easily online now.
Yeah, and the credibility has changed too, because before, if you said like online like degree, people would kind of scoff and it's like, well, it's not the real thing. But now it's like it's fully respected because that's what a lot of people are doing now. So I
Yeah,
think that shift is important because it has the same value. Sometimes the work I had to do in some of those online courses was more than I would do as a student at university. And I go like, this is a lot of
yeah,
work. It's not easy.
yeah, yeah. And you do it at your home.
Yeah.
It's just it's great. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, what is your next step or plan? Is it something like poetry? Is it something you want to continue with, or maybe turn to other types of writing? Or what are your plans from now after this?
Well, after this, this will take some time because I'm trying to get it
Mhm,
known, get the book
mhm,
known.
mhm.
But after this, I'm going to continue writing poetry, and I've been through some relationship. We all have relationship issues and
Yeah,
difficulties and
yeah,
heartbreak,
yeah.
and I think that a book about that would be really interesting.
Mhm,
You know, the ups and downs of, you know, being in love with someone, or you know, whatever, um, or just the relationships between people who are in the same family. You know, it's all about how we interact.
yeah,
But also beyond, and I'll have to see how those come out, and whether it's
yeah,
you know, whether it's more than just submitting to an individual journal, whether it does come together as a book.
yeah.
But the other thing that I've been so excited to think about recently is to take a really good photography class,
Okay.
and then to have photos that I could pair with poems in the future,
Yeah.
because it has been so wonderful to have visual beauty
Mhm,
in a book.
mhm,
Um, and I think it has added a lot to how someone can engage with a book.
mhm.
So those are my plans.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, no, that's wonderful. And so you're a journalist, editor, physician, poet, photographer, soon to
Mother.
be photographer,
Yeah.
musician. Is music something you're looking at too?
No, I
No?
said mother. Mother.
Oh, mother, sorry, mother
Yeah.
always.
Yeah.
Mother
Yeah. Yeah.
always. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
of course.
And wife. Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah.
So many things. And we're all versatile in our own ways. We often don't notice it enough, I think. A lot of people are just
Mhm.
like, or they just say when it's like, well, what do you do? And you just identify with like one profession and say, well, I'm an instructor. But there's again so much more that is part of us. So it would
Yeah.
take
Yeah.
like 20 minutes to explain everything, all the roles and functions that we have, I think.
Yeah. One thing in preparation for talking to people about this book
Hmm.
is I kind of went back and thought about how I got here,
Hmm.
and that's really interesting. It's because what I could look at, or what I could identify, were inflection points.
Hmm.
And so, for example, when I was in college, I ended up alone on a bus in North Africa, and we were just kind of going along, and I was sweating into the seat, and I was praying that my luggage wouldn't fall off the top. And I turned around, and there was a woman sitting there who was clearly local, in, you know, the special material and the beautiful gown she was wearing, although it was not a rich gown, it was a poor person's gown, and she was holding a baby, and the baby had this white discharge pouring out of its eyes. And I was a college student and I didn't have any resources and know of anything in the area.
Mhm.
And so I think that's why, I mean, I'm sure that's why I went to medical school eventually,
Mhm.
because that was like an inflection point
Mhm.
in my life.
Mhm.
And so I think it's really interesting for people to look at that,
Mhm.
because you can see, like we were talking about earlier,
Mhm.
how you've developed
Mhm.
different things and what launched you in that direction. So I was still a college student. I had no intention of going to medical school. I graduated as a journalism student, worked as a book editor, and then I got sick, and I thought, "Oh my goodness, here I am in the hospital, and this is really important, and I'm going to try and do this." So I had to go back to school and take algebra 2 and chemistry and all that stuff.
Mhm.
But to look at those inflection points each person, it
Yeah.
gives you a lot of confidence in how you can change for the future too.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And being mindful of those moments, because there's
Yeah,
you could have probably not looked at that person and that wouldn't have never happened, but just like being aware and seeing these, I think they're signals, they're signs, and it's like
yeah,
signposts
yeah,
that says this is the right path, and just then it comes to you and there's like a gut feeling and intuition that says yes, and I've had that, and I've talked about this too, where sometimes the intuition is doesn't make a lot of sense, and you go, it's like not the rational choice here, it's probably maybe a terrible idea, but it turns out to be the exact idea that you need at that moment often.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. This just reminds me, it seems like a terrible idea. So one of my friends has a child who's applying for college this
Mm.
coming year and has gotten into certain places and and like my own son who some years before didn't get what he wanted, um, and and he was just heartbroken,
Mhm.
but then he went to another place and it was perfect.
Mhm.
And I think
Mhm.
that's again wisdom that you can help your loved ones with when they're trying to make a decision of like it is going to work out.
Yes, it will. And it's not always what we think will happen. And it's actually, that's not always the best choice. You say, I want this, but there's something better out there. And so it's good that you didn't get that choice, because now you get something else that's much
Yeah,
better. And so
yeah,
in a way, I think it works that way. So I try to take things like rejection and everything more with a grain of salt now when it happens, and say, okay, it wasn't meant to happen in a way. I tried my best. It didn't happen. That's it. And a lot of things that happen in our lives. It's like, okay, this is the event. What can we do? Where do I go from now on, from here? And I think that is something that is very important, I think, too.
right,
Mhm.
right. I agree. Yeah,
Mhm. Wonderful discussion. So the book again, Blown Into Now, Poems for a Journey. And
right,
thank you so much for sharing your experiences, your thoughts, your emotions, and having the courage to talk about that. I really, really applaud that. And it resonates with a lot of people too, who are going through difficult times and who have suffered grief and loss, which happens to everyone. But it's that kind of connection that we build through it, and especially something like poetry really touches deep inside, and I hope more people connect with that, with your work, with the photography, and yeah, best of luck to you as well.
great. Thank you so much, and thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, you do. Thank you.